Accidental Safety Pro, brought to you by Vivid Learning Systems and the Health and Safety Institute, episode number 4. My name is Jill James, Vivid's Chief Safety Officer, and today I'm joined by Jeremiah. Jeremiah is from the zoo and aquarium industry on the West Coast and is a director of occupational safety and environmental risk management. Welcome, Jeremiah, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So, Jeremiah, how many years have you been in safety? How long have you been doing this kind of work?
So I would say 13 years total, probably 10 years, formally in a safety type position.
Okay, great. So when you think to the way back, understanding that not all of us came into safety directly, it wasn't, like so many of us we weren't little kids thinking we were going to get into this career. What was the backdoor way you came into it? Like, what were some of those first jobs that sort of led you and put you on this path?
Well, it's interesting, and I think you're right. The accidental safety manager, many of us never planned on being in this role. When I grew up, I didn't say I wanted to be a safety manager
Right.
when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But, I started in a production setting. After college, I got a job, went to work, but I was responsible for managing, a large group of people. And the company I was with was, very risk focused and tried to control risk. And so the emphasis was on PPE and ergonomics and keeping everybody fit. Just like you started your intro, we wanted everybody to go home in the same condition they came to work. And I was fortunate that the company I was with really had a strong developed safety culture, and it rubbed off on every supervisor, every manager.
Mm-hmm.
And by being able to pick up that skill, it really afforded me opportunities down the road that got me where I am today. So it was something I had to embrace as part of our job responsibilities.
Yeah. So you said it was your first job out of college in a production facility. What did you go to college for? What's your degree?
So I went to school for animal science. Like a lot of folks, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
But grad school seemed kind of a lofty goal, and I worked a lot through college. So, the grades weren't quite where they were supposed to be, and it was such a competitive, to get into vet school. And I got to a point where I just, was accumulating debt in college. I needed to get to work. And so I looked for the best opportunity I could in that field, and being in animal science, it was naturally in agriculture.
Okay.
And so I ended up with a large agricultural company that really focused on, safety and risk, like I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that, I had that opportunity.
Yeah. So what part of the country was that first job?
So that was in the Midwest,
Okay.
actually West Texas, up in the Panhandle, and
Okay.
there's more cows than people, and that was the industry I was working in.
Right. Well, that's cool. So how long were you at that first job about?
Let's see, I was a production supervisor for about a year, and it was the type of work that was physical, it was demanding. I was on the night shift, I had a
Wow.
small young family.
Yeah.
And an opportunity came up in the environmental department, which was something that had a microbiology component. It was wastewater, biogas, things I was really interested in, and I was able to apply, some of the science background that I'd had in school and always had an interest. But it opened up a whole nother level of risk. Instead of just looking at PPE and ergonomics for folks that were working an hourly shift, just trying to get through a shift, it was really looking at more hazard recognition, like going into confined spaces or H2S, and working with large equipment and machine guarding and things like that. So it went from that personal safety factor to now let's recognize big risk, and you're working in smaller teams. You've got to be more dynamic. You've got to plan ahead.
Yeah.
You need policies and procedures. So it was really a great chance to kind of broaden that experience. I didn't even realize it was happening at the time. I was just doing the job.
Right.
But,
was it intimidating? I mean, that's a pretty big responsibility for a young person, not necessarily with that background. Was it intimidating, or do you remember it being more like exhilarating and you're like digging into the research piece of how does this work?
I was fortunate that the company I was with had a really great training program.
Okay.
And so we spent time in multiple different departments before we landed where we would be working. And it was a department that I'd spent a couple weeks with that I knew I had an interest in. So when the opportunity came, I was really excited about it. There were other benefits. It got me off the night shift. It
Mm-hmm.
got me,
Mm-hmm.
so I get to see my family more and things like that. So there were motivating factors, but I knew it was the opportunity for me at that facility at that time. And so I fully embraced it, and it was exciting. It really was.
Yeah. So you were there for a while, and then what was the next step? What was the next part of your safety journey?
So I did the environmental management piece, which was environmental auditing and again wastewater management, and I got to go to different facilities and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
all over North America, and it gave me the opportunity when it came to leap into what we all know as the EH&S role, environmental health and
Mm-hmm.
safety. An opportunity came up, and it was actually a canning industry
Okay.
where they were lacking some environmental experience. They had some opportunities, we'll say, with some of their permitting and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to work with an individual that was strong on the safety side,
Mm-hmm.
not on the environmental side, and so we kind of combined our powers. But that was
Mm-hmm.
the first time I had the formal safety title of an EHS manager. So it was the two combined. And so at that point, that's where it was, hey, you're responsible now for these supervisors, making sure that they're managing appropriately, keeping
Mm-hmm.
their staff safe, setting up programs, reducing their XMOD, all those types of things that come along with the safety program.
Yeah.
So that was, that was about 5 years in to my career where I actually had
Sure.
that in true safety title, and it was something I embraced, and I was eager to get out there and make a difference, and it really in this safety role you have that opportunity. So
Right, you do. So, and it sounds like maybe that was one of your first opportunities to kind of have a mentor, right, in the same work environment too. You said you had partnered with someone who had more of a background in safety.
it was, I had a great environmental mentor, and I owe a lot to him. He taught me a lot about that side, and he was always safety minded. He never wanted to get anybody hurt, but to have
Mm-hmm.
someone that was purely focused on risk management and safety from the broad perspective, yeah, it takes a mentor. Safety's a learned behavior. I mean,
Right.
all of these stuff, you've got to have someone kind of show you the ropes and get you up to speed,
Mm-hmm.
especially for the industry specific stuff.
Yeah, right.
There's the common knowledge in the plant or the group that you work with, and that's key to helping you be successful as a safety manager.
Yeah. Can you think of anything from back in those days that in the moment you can think, wow, I never thought I'd do that, or that was a really cool thing I'm really proud of and think about it still to this day, or man, that was such a crazy thing I had to do to build street cred. I can't believe I did that.
Oh, there's plenty of things I can remember my days in the rendering plants
Oh,
where
sure.
we had big steam cookers and pressure
Mm-hmm.
vessels, different things like that, where there was a spill or a failure of some sort that constantly would go, things would go awry during a shift in a rendering
Mm-hmm.
facility, and having to get in with your rubber boots and a shovel with all the guys and start
Mm-hmm.
shoveling, and
Mm-hmm.
it's unique experiences I'll never forget. Is coming home and having to leave my clothes, my work clothes, on the front porch because my wife wouldn't let them come in the
Yeah.
front door.
Yes.
Um, you know,
Yes.
um, but
Yeah,
I,
that's dramatic.
the stuff that I really enjoyed early on was getting into the confined space piece and the confined space
Mm.
entry and participating in those types of trainings, the hands-on
Mm-hmm.
stuff. We would do lagoon cleanouts, or we had these H2S filters that we would have to remove the medium out of. And so working side by side with contractors and staff
Yeah.
to put together a rescue plan, to practice that piece. And fortunately, we never had incidents, but we always felt like we were prepared for them,
Right.
which is great. It gives you a lot of confidence that you're doing the right thing, that you're taking care of your teammates. Everybody's. It's a much better work environment when you know everybody's got your back and you know the plan,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know what you're going to do, and to be able to do it with confidence.
When you were doing those plans way back then, confined space, and probably I'm guessing training people side by side, like this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to monitor the air. This is the rescue equipment we're going to use. Here's how we're locking things out. Was it the people that you're working with then, the people doing the work? Was it a big sell, or did they they kind of go along and say, okay, this makes a lot of sense? Or did you have detractors who were like, we've been doing it this way for, 20 years. Why are we have to listen to you, kid?
Well, the fortunate part at that time in my career and in that role, I had the buy-in from the upper management, from the corporate level, that safety is going to be a priority. We're not budging on compliance, so it made that piece easier. It doesn't mean that I haven't run into that,
Yeah.
in other areas.
Lucky
so
you.
so I was lucky in that format where I was able to get the grounding and develop the skill set that we had, the buy-in and the hierarchy, that made it possible. At that stage, if I hadn't had that, I don't think I could have pursued a safety career any further. It would have been too much of a struggle, and I probably would have gone a different way. But at that point in my career, we had the upper management buy-in, which I know most safety managers struggle with. That they don't always have that. They're always coaching up and coaching down. But in that situation, where I really started to get my feet wet and really started to have influence, I was fortunate to have folks above me that knew the value in the work and that I was doing, and the size of the organization and corporation, because risk was so important to them. They saw value in it. So there was really a top-down approach at that point.
Wow. Lucky you. I mean, that's I think unusual for a lot of people in our field to kind of walk into jobs where that culture and that emphasis already exists. Yeah. You mentioned the rendering plant, which makes me think of when I was working with OSHA. I investigated exactly one rendering plant, and it's the closest I ever got in my career to vomiting. And so when you're describing what you just described, I totally am transported back to this rendering plant, and it was in July that I was inspecting it in Minnesota when it's hot and humid. And you talked about your wife telling you to leave the clothes on the porch. The leather of my belt smelled like the rendering plant.
Yeah, I don't envy the guys that do that for a living.
No,
and,
right?
And if we weren't on the podcast, I could tell you a wonderful story about a college intern that came and worked and ended up in the rendering plant and had a similar experience to you. And there was basically pointing the discussion. And while we were doing one of these cleanups, this young man was running in and out of the plant. To vomit, as you said. And one of the managers goes, "Where are you going?" He's like, It doesn't matter. We're in a rendering plant.
Right? You don't have to worry about keeping the floor clean.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
So no, if no one's ever experienced it, I mean, that's the best description. I mean, if once you step into it, it's like you that's the normal reaction. It was
the
biological reaction. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't the plant inside that bothered me so badly, and I think I have a pretty strong stomach. But they had a loadout bay, and so all these trucks, all these semis would back into this loadout bay. Kind of down a little bit of an embankment, and it was covered over, and it was hot, and it was summer, and doing my job, I was walking between all of these semis. I was looking to see if wheels were chalked and if dock locks were being used, or whatever. And it was between those trucks where it was really bad.
Yeah, there's a unique slurry. There's a unique kind of
right.
It is just there's nothing like it.
Right. So the crazy things, right, that we do in this job, and then like you said, people that work in these facilities year after year for their livelihood, and our role. What is our role? Our role is to make that as safe and as pleasant for them as possible. So you in the canning industry, different from where you had been in the agricultural industry, you added some, I guess, probably some more machinery knowledge, I'm guessing, to your bag of safety tricks at that time.
Sure. The canning industry, it's very unique because you have, not unlike a lot of other agriculture, you have these short harvest seasons where you have these facilities that run around the clock, and you have seasonal folks. So everyone's got to be trained or retrained. But yeah, you've got a lot more conveyor belts, moving equipment, the can seamers, the can fillers, everything is spinning, turning. It's
Mm-hmm.
steam powered. The cookers are steam powered, so it's
It's
hot.
hot. Yeah.
But there's automation, but there's a lot more manual process. I mean, it's an industry that really hasn't changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
From back in the 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the equipment we ran was, old ductile iron equipment that was built in the 30s, 40s, or 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Because the technology hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a different environment, but we still had the material handling, material moving issues, whether it's forklifts, flatbed trucks,
Yeah.
conveyor belts, a lot of different things like that that probably presented the most risk just because everybody's in a hurry, everybody's in a
Mm-hmm.
tight space, and you have to keep up. We had facilities that had 100 trucks a day, another facility that had 300 trucks a day, and these are, you know, produce coming straight from the field that needs to be in a can in 4 to 6 hours. So there's a
Right.
lot of pressure,
Sure.
but every individual is a valued individual with a certain skill set. They're not. You can't just go find another seamer mechanic that
Mm-hmm.
can work on a
Mm-hmm.
seamer. You got to keep those guys
Mm-hmm.
motivated, healthy, and it's tough because those are the types of jobs where there are no weekends. These guys work the whole harvest. It may be
Yeah.
90 days, 120 days, and it's important to them because they want to get as much work as they can during that period, and they follow the harvest. They may go somewhere else and do something
Yeah.
in another location 3 months later.
Sure. So pressure's high all the way around from
Right.
safety to yeah, the whole thing is high. So back then, particularly when you're running 24-hour shifts, how did you do the training back then? And I'm guessing you were working some pretty late nights or overnights too, but how did you approach that with all those people?
Well, we found over time that the most effective way was to try to get everybody pre-hire from the season and do a 4 to 5 hour safety orientation where we covered your basics, whether it was emergency action plan, machine guarding, personal protective equipment. Heat stress was huge.
Yeah, I bet.
So we front loaded the season with as much safety messaging as we could. We actually partnered with the union to help them to understand, hey, we're here to keep your folks safe, and they bought into it as well. But it did take a lot of oversight during the season. We had every shift had an EMT on it that was kind of the first responder, but also managed the safety process. We instituted a inspection program for before and after each break for supervisors, and they worked with the EM teams. We had cooling stations set up. We used to have to flush our eye washes about every hour because this was such a warm environment.
Oh wow, the water would get too
The
hot.
water would get warm in
Wow.
in the eye washes.
Sure.
So we had guys that basically around the clock were making rounds and keeping safety at the forefront. We had, personal protective equipment was issued by the supervisors. So the inspections were done by the supervisors, but we had somebody in safety to have oversight for each shift. So it was really the important part was sharing the responsibilities, making sure that everybody knew their part in keeping their staff members safe. It took me back to being that supervisor on a production floor and understanding how important each one of my team members is. And that experience is what helped me be successful with the folks in the cannery and developing a system that wasn't, you have to make it easy for a frontline supervisor to manage safety. You have to make the PPE available immediately. You can't have them run halfway across the plant when they're trying to meet a production goal.
Right.
You have to have it at their fingertips. You have to make it easy for them to do, and you have to help them understand why it's important to keep their staff running, and how when they don't, how it can really impact them.
Right, right. And what can happen in those times? So you built one skill built onto another skill. So what was the next stop in your career after the canning industry?
Well, I had a short stop in produce with lettuce, actually, fresh lettuce, and that was it was very similar to the canning piece, and then after that, I segued into zoos and aquariums. I know it sounds like kind of a leap, but with the animal science
Right.
background, and at that point, I'd gotten pretty astute in reducing X mods and workers' comp claims, which is all part of a safety manager's role.
Mm-hmm.
That by by developing a process to minimize those injuries, workers' comp claims, when somebody needs that, that's something that translates across all industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was fortunate that I got into the zoo and aquarium industry, and was able to take over some of that piece on the workers' compensation, develop a safety program, and help turn a program around
Mm-hmm.
where things had kind of gotten a little bit out of hand.
Mm-hmm. So in your career, I mean, this is a really big change. I mean, zoo and aquarium industry. Okay, so that's a change. But in my head, I'm thinking you have more than employees now. You've got volunteers. You've got the public, the people who are enjoying the zoo and aquarium industry. Has that all been added to your safety plate as well?
Well, it's kind of funny because you talk about being an accidental safety manager.
Yeah.
We wear all these different hats, especially at these facilities where you have that EH&S role. So
Yeah.
a part of what I did is I managed security too. I never kind of include that in the repertoire of things
Okay.
that we've done, but site security, for particularly the cannery, we had warehouses in an area where we had to keep things secure.
Mm.
And so having some of that background translating over into now, yeah, we have public facing guest experience where folks are coming in and out. How do we keep them safe? How do we keep the staff safe? And then we have a living collection that we're also responsible for. So no, I think
That's
it's
more than a trifecta.
right, and it boils down to having a savvy eye to identify risk or hazards, and
Mm-hmm.
and then it's just general duty, falling back on what's the
Yeah.
best thing that we can do to keep people from avoiding this hazard or injuring
Yeah.
themselves on this. And as long as you are willing to take the responsibility, share those responsibilities with others, get their buy-in,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of safety management principles, translate to every industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's intense. So you've worked in a couple different parts of the country. You're on the West Coast now, and you were in the Midwest before. And I forgot to ask where the canning industry was. How has the way that you approach things changed, or did it change with people in just different parts of the country? Is there a different vibe and a different way that you approach the employees that you're working with?
That's an interesting question, and I think probably in your role as you travel from location to location, it's probably
Mm-hmm.
pretty obvious to you, but I don't think it's obvious to folks that don't get from region to region. But I would say
Mm-hmm.
absolutely yes. Texas has a certain way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
They try to get things done immediately. Let's address it now and let's get it fixed. And on the West Coast, you talked like California casual, and things take time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to be a little bit more diplomatic with your approach, with your messaging. You have to front end load a lot of the reasoning for why we need to do this to help folks understand, to solicit that buy-in. And then still it takes, developing a partnership to work along to get this objective accomplished. I think in every location you still have the old timer that says, "Hey, we've been doing this for 30 years this way. Nothing's
Mm-hmm.
ever happened."
Yeah.
But, I think there are differences in regions, and
Yeah.
I won't necessarily say work ethic, but just the core values are different from region to region, and how that translates into safety and
Yeah.
responsibility is always different.
Yeah, I think so too. When I was in my last job, I was serving a number of different states across the country, and so I would take take my show on the road, more or less. And I remember one time specifically, there was some training I was doing to key groups of managers with them across, I think, 3 or 4 states. And so I started out with my first one in the Midwest in Minnesota, and then I took it next to Missouri. And it was so hard. It fell flat. It had been this really great interaction. We had a great time. People were sharing. It was interactive. The training went well. I did exactly the same thing in Missouri, and it fell flat. And I remember going to our administrative assistant at the time, who had been with the company for 25 years. And I said, Lynn, I was such a failure here. I don't know what I did wrong. And she says, you've got to slow down. You've got to take time. You're in the South. People want to know who you are. They want to know that you know their name, and you need to build a rapport in a different way than you apparently do back home. And I'm like, okay. So, the next time I went back, and I really spent some time with everybody. And in that particular case, I was practicing everybody's names. When you have so many people, it's how could I ever remember everybody's names? But I was I'm going to learn all these people's names. And so before we started anything, I'm I'm back, thanks for being with me again. And then I went around and said out loud all of their names and asked something about them. And they're hey, you really know who we are. And it completely changed the dynamic. And it was something that I had just taken, I didn't know that was part of the job too. And it was because it was their regional thing. They really wanted to build rapport. And it was important to them in the way that I did it, and that I spoke their name. And, who among us wouldn't want that? But it was an awakening for me that different parts of the country are different.
Right. And I think there's certain areas, but it's unique that with safety, especially with safety management and working with a group, even if you're an outsider, we're lucky that we're able to make that connection between getting back home to your family, and how safety is important. And the better that you know the individuals, or the better that they understand you have the same goal, or you make that connection, sometimes the more receptive they are to your messaging, and I don't know if you're talking about something else in the industry, if you have that same opportunity that you do with safety.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned, making it relatable to family and bringing it home. How does being a safety professional work for you when you're not at work? Do you ever get to turn the button off? And what do your kids think about your job?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's a part of me that tries not to take too much work home. I've got a family that is a young family, and we spend a lot of time doing youth sports and fishing and things like that. But it always comes back to something that's safety related. So,
right?
if my wife and my kids, especially, if they see me doing something I'm not supposed to, they're their own little safety managers. They're hey, aren't you supposed to do this or that a certain way?
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you can't turn off safety. It's something you see on a daily basis, and once you start to think that way, it really does transform you. It transforms pretty much everything you do on a daily basis. Now with the risk management piece, it really has changed the way we kind of look, or how I look at things, more critically from that perspective, that I didn't always do in the past. But there are other things that, naturally, I self-select that, I'm not going bungee jumping anytime soon.
Exactly. Me either, because I'm so nervous about who inspected the gear? Was it load rated? What's it attached to?
Yeah, I'm now I'm kind of skeptical at amusement parks. I'm kind of skeptical at, hopping on a pair of skis or a snowboard and going down a mountain. I just know that accidents happen, and especially with kids and family, expect it to some degree, but a lot of it is preventable. And so, maybe we don't have as much, adventurous, extreme fun as I would if I wasn't a safety manager.
Right. I know. I get that from my family and friends too. Driving down the road and I'll see something, I'll be like, oh, like, oh my gosh. And they're like, could you just turn it off? I'm like, I'm sorry, my eyes are trained to notice these things.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, my son at a very young age, I remember him specifically asking me, like, Mom, what's our safety plan for that? And I'm like, oh no.
Right.
Here I've done it. For better or ill, it's at home.
Right.
Oh man.
And it's not something that leaves you, so.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Definitely. So you've been at this career for a while. How has technology entered into what you do? Like in the evolution of, you've had these jobs, like what sort of changed technologically in safety for you?
Well, I think one of the most apparent is we gone from old fashioned, a white paper and a tailgate topic, and doing a lot of the training in a classroom format, which we still do in certain applications, but that used to be the standard. I mean, that used to be how you had to do all your safety training. You had to bring somebody into the safety trailer or the safety classroom and sit down and watch a video. Okay, let's talk about it. Now show me, how to do it. I think with learning management systems, you've got all sorts of technology that folks can have it on their phone. They can have it on a tablet. They can have it on a computer. And I think that's really helpful for the safety manager, safety supervisor to get the content out there. But, that was something we didn't have. I didn't have 10 years ago. And then the stuff that we did have wasn't really up to speed, or it wasn't something that anybody really wanted to sit through an hour of, or much less 4 hours of. So from that perspective, it's changed. But I'd also say, the tablet technology of having a touchscreen and a tablet makes things like doing an inspection and keeping that record so much easier. Or going out and taking a picture for an investigation. Used to, you'd have like those little disposable cameras and like a pouch, and you'd have like okay, write out your narrative of everything that happened, take some pictures, then you got to go get those developed or something like that. Now with a tablet, you can take a picture, or a telephone, everyone's got a phone, and then you can fill out the inspection report or the incident report, all right there, and then the records are kept. You put it in a folder, you put it in a file, you've got it right there. So that's a big change. And if you talk about industry, just the technologies with PLCs and frequency drives and the way so many things are automated now, that's changed the level of risk for the folks that are on the front line, that are out there working with equipment, machinery, processes, which, it does make their job easier.
So Jeremiah, when you're stuck, where do you go for help? Like what are your key places that you go when you're trying to, because I know at least, and I'm guessing you've probably discovered, we're never going to know it all in safety.
Right.
And so what are your sources, or where do you go, or do you have current mentors, or how does that work for you?
Well, I've called you several times and shot you an email.
Goes both ways.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, I think it's important to, have counterparts and other folks that, network with people that do similar work to what you do, because, nothing's really new. Everything's been done before to a large extent. But, there are good resources, whether it's on the internet, through the Calosha site, whether it's trying to look up letters of interpretation, different things like that. It is tough to sift through a regulation and try to find exactly what you need. So having someone that can either help you kind of leapfrog ahead to get to the right spot, or says, I've seen that before, or I remember we did this. So having a network of safety folks that you can reach out to is important.
Yeah. So has your network that you've got now, is it just kind of organic from your past, from your work past, or do you have, like, since you're in the zoo and aquarium industry, do you have a specific network that you reach out to there as well?
Well, a little bit of both, obviously. There are folks that I've done hands-on training with, when it comes to confined space, there's someone that I know he's my go-to. If I've got any question on configuration of a space or rescue or anything like that, I mean, he's the guy I go to. But when it comes to industry-specific stuff, we have the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. They have they do accreditation for zoos and aquariums, and they have a safety and risk management portion. So they have a safety committee that you can go to and ask questions or bounce things off of and see what the rest of the industry is doing.
Yeah.
But even here, we're fortunate that we have career electricians, career plumbers, people in the crafts and trades. You don't think of that as a zoo or aquarium, but all those jobs are really important.
Right.
And many of them have 20 plus years experience, and they're a resource too.
Exactly.
And so sometimes that's the best thing is to go to the end user really and say, what do you know about this? What do you understand about this? What are the risks? What are the contractors and the folks that you work with? What are they telling you?
Yeah. What are you seeing? Yeah.
And that gives you a good place to start sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. When you're not specific to those crafts, like how can you get that information? I know I've talked to electricians specifically a number of times, like just trying to understand what arc flash is. And
Right.
I mean, I can read about it, I can digest videos about it, I can look at it, but to like talk to an electrician and say, have you ever seen this in your field? Like, and what were the circumstances at play and like what happened? And they can give you so many stories that are real world application things that you would never know because you're not an electrician.
Right. No, and that's the perfect example. That's kind of what I was thinking about in the back of my mind. Is exactly that. Every career electrician, a guy that's been around long enough, knows somebody or has witnessed or seen somebody that's been involved with an incident like that, and it's powerful. That story or that understanding is
Yeah.
much more powerful to a group or to helping folks realize the hazard. That really don't see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that practical hands-on experience resonates a lot, especially when you get to the frontline working group.
Yeah, and collecting those stories, I think our discipline is like, we understand the regulations, we are looking at the science of it, but then we're collecting stories because
Right,
it's
right.
the only way to transfer that information, in a believable way. Yeah. So it's, I was curious. You started your career production manager, working shoulder to shoulder, supervising people, and now you're at where you are now. What skills or what do you carry over just about learning about people, and like how has that shaped your approach, especially since you started out the way that you did? How has that shaped your approach to humanity?
Well, it's a great question, and I fall back on this. I was really fortunate that a supervisor early on, when I worked in agriculture, I speak some Spanish. I don't speak a lot. I can kind of get the crew to do what I need, and I can understand some. But the two most important words that I learned were enséñame, which is teach me. And I would walk up to someone, and there's always that awkward, well, this is my supervisor, and they're an hourly individual, and just ask them to teach me what they were doing. And that was the best icebreaker. And once they showed me what they were doing, then I clumsily tried to do the same thing that they did, 2,000 times a shift.
Yeah.
With ease. It was an icebreaker, but it was also that they understood I wanted to understand their job so I could either help them make it easier or help them be more productive. And I always carry that when I ask a manager or a supervisor to do something extra. Safety's not supposed to be something extra, but inevitably it is. They have their own responsibilities, they've got their own deadlines, they've got goals to meet that aren't necessarily safety related, and safety's supposed to be part of what they do. But anytime you have an additional ask, it's an additional task. And so trying to look at it from their lens and how you can incorporate or weave it in to what they do on a daily basis and add value is probably the approach that's helped me be most successful. But it really is teach me,
Teach
help
me,
me
yeah.
understand, come from the position of understanding
Mm-hmm.
first versus walking in and saying everybody needs to wear this type of PPE and everybody needs to
Yep.
do this inspection,
Yep.
you know. So,
Yep.
I that was years and years ago, but those two
Mm-hmm.
words
Mm-hmm.
have really been valuable
Yeah.
for me, and just it just changed my whole perspective, my
Mm-hmm.
paradigm on the
Mm-hmm.
way people view you as a leader or as someone that's got authority to try to understand their perspective first.
Yeah.
You're going to be a lot more successful.
Right. It removes assumption,
Right.
and assumption is not always it's never a good place to start.
Right.
So that's
Right.
yeah, that's beautiful. What part of the job do you really loathe doing? Like, what's the ugh? If I could offload that, what would it be?
There sometimes, sometimes somebody cuts a corner. Somebody does
Mm,
something for whatever reason, whether it's time or resource, they don't stop and make the time to do something appropriate. And so they cut a corner or they violate a safety rule
mm-hmm,
or they put someone inadvertently at risk
mm,
that
mm-hmm.
they really shouldn't. The corrective action piece is never fun. It's an important part if you continue to have issues,
Yeah.
but it's not the best part of the job. And safety shouldn't be punitive, but when you get into circumstances where somebody doesn't lock something out or elevated work or going into a confined space without following a protocol, they've really put someone's health and safety at risk, and that's serious. And when every supervisor is bought in and every manager is bought in and they understand, that's great. When
Mm-hmm,
someone just cuts a corner when they knew or they claim they didn't know but they should have known, that's tough to deal with.
mm-hmm.
But it's our role and it's part of our responsibility. You hear that we should be the kind of the moral compass for our
Mm-hmm.
organization at times, and that's the tough piece.
It is. It's a big responsibility.
Right, right.
Hmm. What keeps you up at night?
Oh man, um, there's plenty that keeps me up at night. It's sometimes it's just, hey, I didn't communicate well enough how big that hazard is.
Yeah.
And you kind of are holding your breath and thinking, man,
In
I
the
hope,
rewind. Mm-hmm.
right, I hope that doesn't get to, to someone.
Yeah.
That kind of piece, and then again, when we get new folks that come in that haven't had the opportunity to be fully trained or through the onboarding process still are young, eager, overzealous. Those are the types of folks that you love to have them, but they
Mm-hmm.
put themselves at risk maybe
Mm-hmm.
when they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that keeps me up too.
Yeah, right, right. So what drives you to keep at this profession, or when you're feeling kind of slogging in it, as I mean, we're human beings, right? Not every day is wonderful. What keeps you going at it, or is there like some story or something in the background kind of playing in your head that propels you to keep moving?
Probably the thing I'm most proud of is being a mentor and being able to develop a couple of other folks into the
Oh,
safety role.
yeah.
There's a young man I worked with in the canning industry. He's become a safety professional. He started as an EMT for me. He became a lead EMT.
Mm-hmm.
So he's an accidental safety manager,
Yeah.
just like the rest of us.
Uh-huh.
He was going to be an EMT on an ambulance and do all kinds of stuff like that. And, you know, I was able to develop him into the role. And he fully embraced it, and he's excellent at it, and I'm really
Mm-hmm.
proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a gentleman I work with now that had a different background, a human resources background,
Mm-hmm.
but has fully embraced the role and the skill set, and developing folks along in that role so that then they can go out and do the good that we've done
Mm-hmm.
in their own way with their own style, but have a solid background.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a coach at heart, and that's what I love to do is coach,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I feel like we're lucky in the safety role, that we're able to coach others, develop others.
Yeah.
And they say, hope this doesn't happen, but a great safety manager will manage themselves out of a job. If you teach enough people
Right.
to be safety managers just like you,
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're doing all the work.
That's right.
It's really hard to get there.
It is. Yeah, it
It
is.
never happens.
I use the fishing analogy, right? You know, if you teach
Right.
them to fish, they'll be able to eat forever.
Yeah.
And it's not a, you know, it's this job isn't just our job. It's not just your job, just my job in a facility. It's really everybody's, and the more we can teach them, the better. So Jeremiah, your mentoring, that's an excellent point that you made. And I'm wondering if anybody who's listening, who's maybe kind of new in their career and is wondering, like, how do you find a mentor? Like, how do you go about doing it? What advice would you give people who like, I don't know who I'd talk to. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I do know that there are a lot of professionals out there, just like you and me, that want to share what they know.
Yeah.
And so if you can ever get to, any forum or networking forum, whether it's at a training, go to those trainings hosted by third parties where you get folks from different industries. I guarantee if you kind of poke around, you'll find someone that's like-minded, and you'll find someone, maybe they've got a little gray in their hair or something, but they want to teach. They're a resource, and they want to share that information. And that's the great thing about safety individuals, is we all know it's a collaborative effort. And so, whether it's in your industry or outside of your industry, either join a group or go to a training that gets you away from your regular work group and gets you out into areas with other industries. Like I said, all this stuff translates to multiple industries and to every industry.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and with mentoring, I guess attending conferences and meeting people, I think that's an excellent way for people to make contacts. I know that I've had numbers of people just directly ask me, like, would you ever consider mentoring, or could I call you sometimes and ask you questions? And I don't believe I've ever said no to anyone. And I have a number of people that kind of contact me regularly who are gotten into the job just like you, accidentally, just like me, accidentally. And I just sort of feel it's my responsibility to help where I can.
Right. Yeah. I think every safety manager feels that way. I think we kind of have that common tie. It's a tie that binds, is that we all want to do good. We all, like you said, we want everyone to get home safe, but we know these hard lessons that have been learned.
Yeah.
There's some of these regulations are written in blood, a lot of them. And we've seen the impact to the families and to the coworkers, and none of us want to see that for anybody. And I think that's part of our kind of badge of honor, is that, it's important for us to share. And like you said, we accumulate these stories. Some of them are firsthand, some of them are second, third hand, but we all know that they were real. They happened. There were real people involved, and there were victims, and there were families. And I think we all take that serious, that we never want to be the one that has to call a family and say this happened. And so anything we can do to help prevent that from happening and sharing that knowledge with other folks, it's valuable, and most safety managers are more than willing to share it.
Yeah, I think so too. So Jeremiah, last question. What do you think is the highest priority for our profession today?
Wow.
Or where do you see it? Where do you see it going right now?
I think the highest priority for our profession, we've got, technology is getting, so far ahead of itself. And with I'm going to drop the keyword, the millennial generation, is that we're bringing folks into industry that there's not as much of or I don't see as much of the blue collar element in that class and that demographic, yet we still have needs in these jobs and these roles. So how do we combine the technology and the training and get those stories out in front so that we can continue to have people to embrace hard work, and doing so with a safety culture in mind, to be productive, be interactive. My biggest concern is that everyone's, stuck with their face in their phone or some other piece of technology. We don't have that face-to-face one-on-one interaction. That's the one thing with the online training pieces is that, you're interacting with the computer. I think you've got to combine that with the tailgate piece or some face-to-face interaction. But there's a big divide between you've got your baby boomers and then the folks in between and the younger generation coming up. How do we get the core values that resonate from top to bottom from all those age groups to help develop a hardworking yet safe, productive, labor force here, because we have so many great opportunities here in the U.S. Whether it's agriculture, textiles, importing, exporting. There's so many different industries. We're gonna need able-bodied individuals to keep doing these jobs as we see baby boomers retiring out, and there could really be a labor shortage if enough people don't get into these roles. So we've got to make these jobs dynamic. We've got to make the technology apply, and we've got to get the workforce educated and really ingrained to want to do this type of stuff.
Maybe some of it is what you spoke about earlier, which is just so simple. Teach me, right?
Right.
And so if our new generation coming into the workforce is equipped with the confidence to be able to ask and say, teach me.
Right.
And the people on the other end that are willing to show and teach, so we, like you said, we can do training, we can do things online, we can do things virtually. And that's wonderful for setting baselines, for getting specific types of information transferred to people. But I think there's a lot of power in that. Teach me,
right.
Show me once they're in that role. That's where the rubber meets the road with safety. It's what is someone going to do when no one else is watching?
Exactly.
And you get that, and that's where that question that you said so perfectly, teach me, that's how it happens. That's how it happens. Show me how you do this. Teach me how to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Jeremiah, thank you so much for being with me today and being with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more of the podcast. I want to hear about other incidental, accidental safety managers' experiences, and hopefully, somebody got some value from our discussion today.
I'm sure they did. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining in and listening today. And thank you for the work you all do to make sure your workers make it home safe every day. You can listen to all of our episodes at vividlearningsystems.com or subscribe in the podcast player of your choosing. If you have a suggestion for a guest, including yourself, please contact me at social@vividlearningsystems.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.